Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in June and July. So in total, for these last 2 months, I finished 13 books. Now that's actually a little low for me. I didn't have the very best reading month this summer so far, but I'm hoping it'll get better. So I'm going to be doing this by starting with my lowest rated book and then working my way up to the highest rated books that I've read. So let's just get into this. So the very first book that I'm going to be talking about and the worst book that I've read these last couple months is Orange to You Dear One by Ichigo Takano. So I was very disappointed when I read this book. I actually have the rest of the series right here behind me, and I really enjoyed those, but this one was unnecessary. I read this in my 24-hour reading challenge vlog, and I thought I was really going to enjoy it, but I felt like this story, which follows the friends of the two main characters from the main series, it takes into account their point of view throughout the events of the first two books in a very summarized, condensed version. Now, I felt like telling these stories was unnecessary and actually kind of belittled the main problem of suicide from the first two novels. So I felt like the first two novels handled the topic of suicide very well. It talked about the struggles of the main character and his love interest and really delved into their backstory. While this book focused on their friends who had far less to do with the main storyline. I felt like this could have been just a cash grab to extend the story and make more money. It didn't tell a very compelling story. I did not care about hearing the point of views from these side characters. I actually didn't like that this book continuously emphasized that the friends were trying to help by saying to try and be happy, to call them whenever he was feeling sad. And I felt like that really minimized the problem of suicide. Nowhere in this book did the friends encourage this teenage boy to reach out to his guardians, to reach out to an adult figure that he trusted, or to seek professional help from school or through his grandparents. They took this problem on their own, and I felt like they would have been very ill equipped to handle what this boy was going through. I did not think it sent a good message. I thought the characters were boring. I thought it was an unnecessary plot. So I gave this book 1 star. Now, fortunately, Orange was the only book that I gave 1 star throughout the whole 2 months. The next few books that I read and gave 2 stars, let's start with the first one. So the most recent book that I read and gave 2 stars was The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. I feel like I am in a very small minority here of people that did not enjoy this book. So The Blade Itself mainly follows 4 male characters who don't really have an interconnected story, and it seems to follow, I guess, what's going on in their lives. It's a very character focused story. So these characters are very morally gray. You don't really know if they're considered good guys, if they're considered villains. That's not really the point of the story. It mostly follows how their actions affect their lives and how they all become interconnected when this war is about to break out in their land. I didn't really like a lot of these characters. There were a few that I found interesting and kind of enjoyed reading from, but for the most part, the story was a little too slow for me. I felt like for one thing, the story was a little too slow. It was very character focused. There wasn't much of a plot going on for most of the book. And I think I've come to realize that for high epic fantasy, for me, I enjoyed the epic part of it, and slow going character focused books like this don't really work for me. I found it boring and I was losing interest and zoning out while listening to this audiobook. It could get better. Fairly confident that it could, but I don't know if I'll be continuing on with this series, unfortunately. The next book that I'm going to be talking about that I rated 2 stars was A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. Now, I read the Court of Thorns and Roses series or trilogy, the main trilogy, last year, and I enjoyed it well enough for what it was. I knew what to expect with this fantasy romance story. And this story follows the main character's sister, who, if you haven't read the original trilogy, skip this part because the even just a summary or the synopsis for A Court of Silver Flames will spoil the main trilogy. This follows Feyre's sister Nesta, who has been traumatized by the war that ended in the first trilogy. She is going through it, and in the hopes of helping her out, her family sends her to train at this secluded castle with Cassian. It's like a love-hate relationship. You kind of see it coming from the first trilogy. This sort of develops the relationship, develops Nesta as a character, and what she and the repercussions of what she went through in the first trilogy. This was definitely more adult. It's a much thicker book. I didn't really enjoy it as much as the first trilogy because I felt like for me it went on too long. The smut was very heavy in this book, and I did not really care about continuing the storyline of Akatar. I just wanted to see what would happen and how it might affect any other series that may come out as a spin-off for this for A Court of Thorns and Roses. I'm glad I read it, but 2 stars. Now the next book that I rated 2 stars was Never Lie by Frieda McFadden. So I listened to this on audio, and it basically follows this couple who get stranded at this abandoned mansion. They get snowed into this mansion and they think they're alone, but maybe they aren't when things in the house start to move. The woman starts to hear things, and she discovers tapes that detail the patient records of this very well-known, kind of infamous therapist who went missing. Now, through these tapes, the main character starts to learn more about the caseload of this therapist and maybe even learn how she disappeared. I wanted to give Frieda McFadden a try because I've been hearing that she's a kind of a popular author. But personally, I did not care for her writing style. I found it very simplistic. And the plot, although it was fast paced enough, it didn't really intrigue me too much. There wasn't as much suspense as I typically like in my thrillers. I felt like it was kind of predictable in a way, and I didn't care about the characters. I don't think they were very well written. And yeah, I personally maybe try reading another one of her books, but Never Lie was definitely not it. Now, moving on to my 3-star reads for June and July. The first one I'm going to be talking about is Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Oseman. So this continues on with the story of Charlie and Nick as they become officially boyfriends, and goes on to tell more of the story of how they come out to their family and friends and what has happened to them now that they are out as a gay couple and how it isn't easy for them. So in this one, they go on a trip to Paris, and it's really cute. um if you've been watching the TV show on Netflix, I believe this is the volume that the new season focuses on. And yes, it was really cute, but I didn't feel like it added as much to the story or the message of the first two graphic novels. So I didn't rate it as highly as the first two, and even not as highly as the fourth one. Spoiler for what I'm going to be talking about next. So yeah, it definitely wasn't as deep, but if you like the cutesy, butterflies in your stomach feeling of first love and hearing about these two very heartwarming characters, then you'll probably enjoy this. Just don't expect as much deep thought. Now, the next book that I rated 3 stars was Creep by Jennifer Hillier. So I really enjoyed one of Jennifer Hillier's other books. I think it's here somewhere. Oh, right here. Things We Do in the Dark. So I decided to try another book that she wrote, and I picked up Creep. So this book basically follows this college professor who has an affair with one of her students. And when she breaks off the affair because she's now engaged, things go wrong because her student is basically the creep from the title. Oh, this book definitely some gray characters. Like, these characters, actually not even gray, these characters are not good people, and you basically read about them making bad choice after bad choice, especially our main character. And I found myself like trying, like wanting to pull my hair out because I'm just thinking like, are these characters not thinking their decisions through? What is going on? So I felt like this book was definitely not as great as the other book that I loved by her. It was a very surface level thriller, what you basically expect from it. It didn't really wow me in any particular way. I didn't like not enjoy it. It was just very middle of the road. The next book that I gave 3 stars was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is another book that I read in my 24-hour reading challenge. And for this one, I heard a lot of great things about this young adult fantasy romance. I don't even know if you can call this a romance, to be quite honest. So it basically follows Jude, who, when she was a little girl, her parents were murdered. So her and her sisters were swept off to the Fey land by their parents' murderer, and she is raised by him and is trying to make her way in this fey world where she is not respected because she is immortal. I didn't really understand Jude's motivation. I had no idea why she wanted to make it so badly in this world, why she needed the fey's respect when they were such horrible creatures to her. Especially the youngest son of their high king, who is exceptionally cruel to her along with his friends. Now I assume that's where the romance is going to come about. I don't think I'm a fan of hate to love, or maybe not this particular hate to love, because I don't see how people can fall in love after being this horrible to each other. I just don't get it personally. I felt like the middle part, the beginning and the middle, the first 75% basically was very slow for me. I didn't really care too much about what was going on in the story. I was basically reading it along to learn more about the characters, but the plot was very boring. Maybe the last 25% though is what basically kept this book from going down a couple stars. The last 25% was very interesting. It even had me thinking, do I want to continue on with the series just to figure out what happens? Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. So, the last book that I rated 3 stars was unfortunately House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. So, I really enjoyed the first book in this series, in the Crescent City series. I really enjoyed it, but unfortunately, this book kind of let me down quite a bit. I focus a lot more on the romance. Maybe that's a huge reason why. The first book I felt focus more on the plot and the fantasy and setting up the world. So I think that's probably why I enjoyed it a lot more. This one definitely was very heavy on the romance. And I felt like the plot was a bit all over the place in the first 50 to 75% of the book. Now, I did like how things picked up towards the end. When the story started to actually get going, I enjoyed that part. A lot of what was happening was there'd be a little bit of action, something would happen, then they go back and regroup and chit chat, romance, friendship, and then another event would happen, and then they go back and regroup and talk, chit chat, develop romance, develop. So I felt the pace was not consistent at all. Very heavy on the romance. There was a bit more world building and lore, don't get me wrong. Those parts I did enjoy. I loved how Sarah J. Maas expanded on this world. And I am still looking forward to the next book in this series, despite not enjoying this entry as much. Now, because it is a second book in a series, I can't really talk too much about what it's about, but I do still think if you enjoyed the first book, you should still read on and continue with this next one. Now, getting into my 4-star reads and my highest reads of the last 2 months. The first one I'm going to be talking about is Heartstopper Volume 4 by Alice Oseman. So, like I mentioned earlier, I enjoyed this book a lot more than Volume 3. Charlie and Nick are still in a relationship, but I felt like this book went more into who they are individually and the struggles they face on their own, not just their relationship struggles, like their mental health struggles, their familial problems. And then, starting a new school year as an openly gay couple. That's definitely why I enjoyed this more. And if you like the first 3 novels, you should definitely continue on with the series. Now, the next book that I rated 4 stars was 19 Minutes by Jodi Picoult. So, 19 Minutes basically tells the story of a school shooting that happens in this small town in the US. Now, this book was written, I think, in like 2007, and it really saddens me to see that all the very important points that this book made back in 2007 are still very much relevant to this day. You know what happens in the beginning, and it basically follows what led up to this tragic event from different point of views from people in the city. It talks about bullying, it talks about the struggles of teenagers these days, and actually not even these days. It talks about the struggles of what teenagers face in school of trying to fit in and the extent to which they will go to be accepted. I guess what's really important in this book is examining this story and this sort of trauma from the point of view of not just the shooter, but witnesses to the shooting, survivors, friends of the shooter, the parents of the shooter, judges and police officers, detectives, lawyers that were involved in the case, and basically how this traumatic event affects their whole town. Now, I thought this book was really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It discusses a very difficult topic in a very nuanced way. Like, it didn't just examine this from one point of view. It looked at the problem from all the different points of views that are involved. I don't know if this is a topic you think you can handle. I definitely recommend reading this one. Now, the next book that I gave 4 stars was V1 by John Mars. So I read this because I read The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren, and I really didn't like that book because it focused a lot on the romance rather than the sci-fi aspect of it. This book follows the same idea where DNA is used to match people up on a dating app rather than going the route of following one couple and watching them fall in love. This follows multiple different couples and how using that sort of technology does may sound like a great thing, but it also comes with not just challenges, but a whole lot of problems. Now, I found this book very interesting. I loved following the different characters and seeing how their romances played out when tampering with this kind of technology, like using technology and science and DNA to find true love. Like, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have thought about that, but if it were ever actually to happen, what are the potential consequences of doing that? So if that sounds like it'll be interesting to you, I definitely think you should read this. Very fast paced, very interesting. Love following the characters. They're very well developed. Like I one thing I struggle with when following many different POVs is not being able to tell the difference if none of the characters have a very distinct voice. Now, in the beginning, I thought that would be a problem, but as the story went on, I did not have any problems at all telling the characters apart because they were very well written. Now, the next book that I rated 4 stars was And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Fredrik Backman. Now, Fredrik Backman's writing style is interesting to me. I love how he talks about difficult topics in a very heartwarming way. I've read a few of his other books, and I'm just going to add this novella into the list of books that I enjoyed. Now, this one basically follows this elderly man who is his memory and mental capacity is slowly deteriorating, and it examines how he feels about that and how his family feels while taking care of him and having to deal with losing somebody who's still there but isn't really there anymore. I found it very touching and very saddening watching this elderly man's slow deterioration, like losing his memory, losing the memory of his loved ones and his most cherished memories. Fredrik Backman's writing style is still very much there. If you want a tear jerker, I definitely recommend you read this one. Now, the last book that I'm going to be talking about, and unfortunately, the highest book I rated that isn't even a 5 stars, but I still really enjoyed very much, was How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. Now, this book follows these siblings whose parents have died and now have to come back together in their hometown to get their parents' home ready for sale. But maybe the house isn't doesn't want to be sold because it's haunted. Although this is a horror book, it doesn't just try to scare you. It tries to talk about other things that go beyond the thrilling, scary aspect of it. It talks about generational trauma, family problems, sibling relationships, parental relationships with your parents. I also like this book because although it is a horror, it isn't a horror that took itself too seriously. One of the reasons I have such a problem reading certain horror books is when I find that they're trying to be too scary, that it's taking itself too seriously, and I just end up laughing about it because I'm like, that's not as scary, not as deep as you think it'll be. But this book definitely doesn't do that. There is definitely a hint of humor, sarcasm that is present throughout the whole book. This book knows how ridiculous it is to be scared by dolls and puppets and little haunted things coming to life, you know, when you're by yourself in the dark. So kind of makes fun of that even as an adult, those things can definitely still be scary, especially when you connect them to childhood memories. I really enjoyed following this main character, although I didn't always agree with her decisions. I loved hearing about her thought process, and although I was a bit confused around the 75% mark because I thought the book should have been over, that last 25% definitely brought it home. I think the only reason I didn't rate this 5 stars is because there were some parts that may have dragged just a little bit. You know, the high pacing wasn't there the whole time, and I didn't really expect it to keep that high pacing throughout the whole 400 pages of this book, but it was still there for a majority of it, so that's why I decided to rate it 4 stars. And that's it, guys. Those are all the 13 books that I read in June and July. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and if you've read any of these books and liked it or disliked it, let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. And with that said, I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye!